Military personnel only, Missy. This bird's tight. You'll catch the next rotator. Sometime. The young man behind the counter did not look up when he said it. That was the first mistake, though he would not learn it for another 2 hours. His name tape read, Brandt, Senior Airman, 24 years old, and the master of a 40-foot stretch of linoleum, a scanner, and a screen that told him who flew and who waited. In the desert, at a coalition air mobility hub where the heat did not leave the building even at night, that screen was a kingdom, and Tyler Brandt ran it like a king who had never been told no. The woman on the other side of the counter did not argue. She set her boarding chit down, squared it with the edge of the counter, and looked at him the way a person looks at weather. Plain clothes, a gray travel shirt, canvas trousers, scuffed boots. A single soft bag at her feet with no unit patch, no name tape, no luggage tag from any airline that had ever existed. Around her wrist, a watch, worn with the face turned inward toward her pulse. Nothing about her asked to be noticed, and so she was not. "I'm manifested," she said. "Seat 14. Rated for the aircraft." Brandt smiled at his screen. "Everybody's manifested, ma'am. Doesn't mean everybody flies. Tonight's a hard load. I've got pallets, I've got priority personnel, and I've got a contractor with actual orders standing right behind you." He finally lifted his eyes, and they slid over her without interest. "You? You're a name I can move. So I'm moving you." He tapped the screen twice. Seat 14, which had glowed green, went gray, and a man with a duffel and a polo shirt stepped up to take it. The woman stepped back. She did not raise her voice. She did not reach for a phone or a card or a higher authority. She said again, only the facts, in 3 words, the way a person states a position they do not intend to repeat. Manifested. Seat 14. "Stand by," Brandt corrected, cheerful now. "Stand by 14. There's a difference, and the difference is me." She held his eyes for 1 beat. 2. Then she nodded once, picked up her bag, and crossed to a bench in the far corner, where the air was a degree cooler and the light did not reach. She sat. She set the bag against her boot, settled her hands on her knees, and went still. It was a particular kind of still. Not the slump of a tired traveler. Not the fidget of someone wronged and rehearsing a complaint. She sat the way a thing sits that has decided to wait, and the waiting cost her nothing. Her spine did not touch the back of the bench. Her eyes moved once around the terminal, the 2 exits, the door to the flight line, the back office, the security camera in the corner, and then settled, and did not move again, except to track what mattered. Around her, the terminal churned. 20-some passengers on hard benches, soldiers in fresh uniforms going forward, contractors going back, a chaplain asleep sitting up, the smell of diesel and burnt coffee and canvas. Out past the glass, under the white floodlights, a C-130 sat with its ramp down, its 4 propellers still, while a ground crew built pallets in the heat and a loadmaster argued with the night. Brandt narrated his own importance to a buddy leaning on the far end of the counter. "Watch this place fall apart without me," he said. "I move 40 souls a night. 40. And every one of them thinks their reason's the special one." He laughed. "Lady over there told me she's rated for the aircraft. Rated. Like she's gonna fly it." The buddy laughed with him, because the buddy also had nothing to lose by laughing. In the corner, the woman drew a small notebook from her shirt pocket. She uncapped a pen. She looked at the clock above the counter, then at the screen behind Brandt's head, where the manifest scrolled. Then she wrote a single line. She did not write it angrily. She wrote it the way a person writes down a license plate. She checked the watch worn against her pulse. 2041. She wrote that too. She was not waiting for the next rotator. She was counting. Names, times, the small machinery of a thing that had been running long before she walked into it, The boy with the clipboard believed he had bumped a tired civilian off a crowded plane. He had, in fact, just introduced himself, by name and rank and bad habit, to the incoming commander of every aircraft on that flight line. He simply had not been told yet. None of them had, and the woman in the corner was in no hurry at all to tell them. The C-130 outside was already 40 minutes from on time and getting later. The trouble on the ramp was a pallet that would not sit right. Senior Master Sergeant Frank Delgado had loaded more aircraft than most men had driven cars, and he knew before the numbers came back that the build was wrong. 22 years he had spent on ramps like this one, in heat like this, and worse, and the airframe talked to him the way an instrument talks to the person who plays it. This one was telling him the center of gravity was off, that someone had stacked a pallet to the printed weight without reading the arm, and that if he flew it as built, he would be muscling a nose-heavy aircraft off a hot runway with a tired crew. "Reweigh it," he told the ground chief. "It's not the weight, it's where the weight's sitting." The ground chief, young and stubborn and 40 minutes behind, did not want to reweigh anything. Numbers are numbers, Smoke. It's inside limits. The total's inside limits. The index isn't. Delgado dragged a hand down his face. You build to the number and ignore the station. You get a number that's right and an airplane that's wrong. Break it down. Restation it forward. The ground chief said something about the schedule, and the schedule said something back, and the argument went in the circle that arguments go in when everyone is correct about a different thing. Delgado felt the minutes peel off the night. The crew was already at the edge of their duty day. Every minute on the ramp was a minute he would owe back somewhere over the dark country, between here and the forward field. That was when the woman in the gray shirt walked past on her way to the water point, and without slowing, without looking at him, as if she expected to be heard, said the thing that ended it. "Your problem's the index, not the weight. Restation the pallet to the forward arm. You're about 200 over on the aft station. Pull it, set it on the forward arm, and your index walks back into the box. You won't have to reweigh a thing." She kept walking. She filled a paper cup at the water point. She drank it standing in 4 swallows, the cup already crushing in her hand before Delgado found his voice. He looked at the build sheet. He looked at the aft station. He did the math he should have made the ground chief do 20 minutes ago, and the math agreed with the woman in the gray shirt down to the station and the number. 200 over on the aft arm. Move it forward. Index back in the box. "Who did you say you were?" he asked. She did not say. She dropped the crushed cup in the bin, gave him a nod that was almost nothing, and walked back toward the dark corner of the terminal with the unhurried economy of someone who had never in her life taken 2 steps where one would do. Delgado watched her the whole way. He watched the way she moved, nothing wasted, weight balanced, her eyes touching the exits as she crossed the room and then leaving them. Filed. The way you file a thing you have already decided you might need. He watched her fold back onto the bench and go still, and the back of his neck, which had been right about more things than he could count across 22 years, told him in its quiet way that something in this building did not add up. He turned the math she had handed him into orders. Break the pallet. Forward arm. Move. This time the ground chief moved because the loadmaster's voice had changed, and the build came apart and went back together right. And the airplane that had been wrong was, in 4 minutes, correct. What stayed with Delgado was not that she had been right. Engineers were right. Civilians read manuals. What stayed with him was the words she had used. Station, arm, index. The precise vocabulary of a person who had not learned weight and balance from a book, but had carried it in her hands at 3 in the morning on 100 ramps, who had felt a nose-heavy aircraft fight her off a runway and never wanted to feel it again. Contractors did not talk like that. Contractors said the weight looks fine. She had named the station and the number on the station, walking past, without breaking stride, the way you correct a thing you have done 10,000 times. He had heard that fluency in exactly two kinds of people across 22 years, the loadmasters he had trained, and the aircrew who flew what he loaded. She was neither, and she was both, and the contradiction sat in his chest like a swallowed stone. Inside, at the counter, Brandt was bumping a second passenger. This one was a sergeant, a real one, going forward to rejoin a unit, with orders in his hand and priority on the screen. Brandt frowned at something, tapped, and told the sergeant the load had tightened and he would have to catch the next bird. The sergeant protested. Brandt produced the same easy smile he produced for everyone, the smile of a man for whom other people's emergencies were administrative weather, and the sergeant, outranked by a clipboard, sat down. Out on the ramp, Delgado glanced through the glass at the counter, then at the corner where the gray-shirted woman sat, writing in a small notebook, then back at the counter. 41 minutes late, and the lateness was not the airplane's fault, and it was not the pilot's fault either. The lateness had a name, and the name was wearing a senior airman's stripes and enjoying itself. Delgado had spent 22 years learning to trust the feeling he was having. He did not yet know what it meant. He only knew that the quiet woman in the corner had read his airplane like a page, and that the boy at the counter could not read the room he was standing in. When the boarding call came, Brandt did not call seat 14. He called the manifest in his own order, the way a man deals cards he has already arranged, and when he reached the 14s, he announced, with a grin, aimed at the contractors near the counter, that the civilian's been re-rolled to stand by. She'll go when there's room, which there isn't. Two of the contractors laughed. It was a small laugh, the kind that costs nothing and buys a man a moment of belonging, and Brandt collected it like a tip. The nickname started there. By the time the line had shuffled forward, it had a shape. Seat 14, the standby lady. Passed back along the benches the way a bored room passes anything that lets it feel briefly above someone. Brandt fed it. He leaned into the microphone and said, "Standby lady. We'll call you if the airplane grows a seat," and grinned at his own line, and a contractor near the front said, "Good one," the way people do when proximity to power feels like power. In the corner, the woman wrote. She did not flush. She did not stand to defend herself or scan the room for an ally. She uncapped the pen, looked at the clock, looked at the screen, and added a line to the notebook in a small, flat hand. A name. A time. The thing she had been doing for an hour, while the room decided she was a punchline. Behind the counter, a second airman watched all of it and did not laugh. Airman First Class Devin Pratt was 21 and 3 months into the job, and still made the mistake of reading the screen as if it meant something. He had pulled the manifest twice now, because the manifest and the man kept disagreeing, and the manifest kept losing. He leaned toward Brandt and said, "Low," the thing the screen had been telling him. "Senior Airman. Systems got 14 as confirmed. P1 priority, not standby." He turned the monitor a few degrees. "Look, it overrides the contractors. We're supposed to bump them, not her." Brandt did not look. "System's wrong. I'm right. The system doesn't know what's on my ramp. I do." He said it without heat, which was somehow worse than heat. "Sit down, Pratt. Learn the difference between what the computer says and how the world works." "But the flag says Pratt." Just the name, flat, with the small weight of a man who has decided that being questioned by a junior is itself the offense. "Lane, stay in it." Pratt sat down. He was 21. He looked at the glowing P1 flag on his screen, and then at the woman in the corner, and he had the specific sick feeling of a person who is right and outranked and has just learned that those two things do not always rescue each other. Across the terminal, the woman closed her notebook on a full page. She slid it back into her shirt pocket, capped the pen, and folded her hands on her knee. She had 3 names now. She had a dozen times. She had the shape of the whole thing, the way you have the shape of a tune after the second verse. She did not look angry. That was the part a watcher would have remembered, if anyone in that room besides Delgado had been watching. She looked like a person taking inventory of a property she already owned and had decided, for reasons of her own, to let the tenants run a while longer. If you have ever stood in a room and watched a good person get made into a joke by a small man with a clipboard, if you have ever been the person at the counter or the one watching and unable to fix it, then you know the thing tightening in your chest right now. Hold on to it. Subscribe and stay, because the clipboard does not win this one. It only thinks it has. The microphone crackled. "Stand by, lady," Brandt said. "Still standing by?" And he laughed. And the airplane outside finally built right, waited for a manifest that was wrong. When a man like Brandt feels a thing slipping, he reaches for paper. He could not have said what was slipping. The night was his, the screen was his, the joke had landed. But the old loadmaster kept glancing through the glass, and the junior clerk had gone quiet in a way that felt like judgment, and the woman in the corner would not give him the one thing that would have made it all fine. She would not be upset. So Brandt did what small administrators do when the ground tilts. He made the record say what he needed it to say. He keyed the bumped sergeant as a no-show, failed to appear at final call. It was a lie that took 4 keystrokes and turned a man Brandt had bumped into a man who had bumped himself. Then he opened the civilians line, the gray-shirted woman's line, and in the remarks field he typed, "Uncooperative, refuse to clear counter area, possible security concern." He read it back to himself and liked it. It moved her from a person he had wronged to a problem he had managed. He needed a signature for the no-show role, and the signature came over without being asked. Master Sergeant Dane Holloway ran the air terminal the way a man runs a thing he has stopped respecting. 41, 15 years in, with a soft authority and a softer conscience, he drifted to the counter, glanced at the screen for exactly as long as it took to not read it, and pressed his thumb to the reader. "Roll 'em both," Holloway said. "Manifest's mind to balance. Nobody upstairs counts benches." He said it the way a man says a thing he has said many times, to many juniors, on many nights. "You good?" "I'm good," Brandt said. "Then we're good." And Holloway was already turning back toward the office, the approval given, the lie notarized, the night's small machine humming along. In the corner, the woman watched the master sergeant's thumb touch the reader. She noted the name on his tape. She noted the time. She noted the screen he had touched and the 4 seconds he had spent not reading it. Her pen moved once. The watch against her pulse read 2109. Delgado came in off the ramp to sign for the load and saw 3 things at once, the way men who have done a thing for 22 years see in bundles. He saw the master sergeant walking away from a counter he should not have been balancing. He saw the contractor with the duffel, the one in seat 14, pass something small and fold it across the counter to the master sergeant's hand on the way by, a thing that was not paperwork. And he saw the woman in the corner, who had no badge and no lanyard, who carried a sterile bag with no tags, whose watch was turned inward, the way a person turns a watch when they have spent years not wanting light off the crystal to give away a position. 3 things. They added to a number Delgado did not like. He crossed to her bench, slow, and stopped a respectful distance off, the way you approach a sentry. He spoke low, under the terminal noise. "Ma'am, you got somebody you can call." She looked up at him. For the first time all night, something in her face moved. Not much. A flicker at the corner of the mouth, gone before it arrived. "Don't need to," she said. "It calls itself." Delgado did not understand the words. He understood the tone, which was the tone of a person who has set something in motion and is simply waiting for physics to finish the job. He held her eyes a moment longer, gave a single nod. Soldier to soldier, though he could not have said why that was the grammar his body chose, and went to sign for his airplane. Behind him, the seat trade finished its small transaction. The contractor took 14. Holloway took the folded thing into the office. The sergeant with real orders sat keyed as a no-show. And on paper, on the only record anyone upstairs would ever pull, the gray-shirted woman in the corner was now an uncooperative civilian with a possible security concern, refusing to clear the counter, sitting exactly where she had been told to sit. She closed the notebook on a full page and rested her hand flat on the cover. The trap in that terminal wasn't hers. She had not built it. She had walked into it the way you walk into a house you have inherited and find squatters in the kitchen, eating your food, certain it is theirs. She had spent 2 hours learning the floor plan. She knew the names now. She knew the signatures. She knew the small folded thing and the hand it went into. It was not her trap, but it was nearly shut, and she had been very patient about standing inside it without letting anyone hear it close. Frank Delgado could not let it go. He told himself he was signing for a load, which he was. He told himself the counter was not his lane, which was true. But 22 years had built a man who could not walk past a thing that did not add up, and so before he climbed into the airplane, he stepped to the operations terminal at the side of the room and pulled the master manifest himself, the real one, the source, the screen behind the screen that Brandt narrated. It told him what the boy Pratt had already said and been punished for saying. Seat 14. Confirmed. Priority 1. A flag that overrode contractors, overrode space available, overrode almost everything that walked through a passenger terminal short of a casualty evacuation. Someone, somewhere up the chain, had put that woman on this airplane with a priority that did not get bumped by a tired senior airman with a grudge. Delgado frowned and did the thing that turned a frown into a problem. He scrolled back. 3 rotators. 4. He watched the pattern come up out of the data the way a shape comes up out of dark water. P1 passengers bumped. No shows keyed at final call. Contractors seated in priority slots. And every roll, every single one, approved by the same thumb. Holloway. Master Sergeant Holloway, balancing his manifest, counting benches nobody upstairs counted. It was a market. Someone had been selling the forward rotator a seat at a time and dressing the bumped passengers as no shows so the numbers closed. And the boy at the counter, Delgado was almost sure, did not even know he was the front of a store. Brandt thought he was a king. He was a clerk in someone else's shop. And the genius of it, the quiet ugliness of it, was how small each piece looked alone. One bumped passenger on a busy night was nothing. One no-show at final call was a thing that happened. A contractor with a duffel taking a priority seat was the kind of error a tired terminal made 40 times a week. No single line of it would ever draw a second look from anyone upstairs, because no one upstairs counted benches. It was only when you scrolled back, 3 rotators, 4, the way Delgado was scrolling now, the way no one was supposed to bother, that the pattern lifted off the screen and became a thing with a shape and an author. Holloway had built it out of forgivable pieces, and the forgivable pieces were the whole defense, and the only weakness in the design was a loadmaster too stubborn to walk past wrong math, and a woman in a gray shirt who had apparently come to this terminal a day early for the express purpose of scrolling back. Delgado closed the screen and went to the counter and did the kind thing first, because he was that kind of man. He leaned in close to Brandt, voice flat and low. No audience, the way you give a younger man a door he can still walk through. Son, walk it back. Right now. Put the lady on, fix the no-shows, square the role. Do it in the next 5 minutes, before this gets a rank attached to it that you can't laugh off. Brandt heard an old loadmaster telling him how to run his own counter. He heard the lady, civilian, nobody. He heard a man called Smoke trying to be important. She's a contractor with an attitude, Brandt said. And respectfully, Smoke. Stay in your lane. Cargo's yours. The counter's mine. Delgado looked at him for a long moment, and something behind his face closed like a hatch. Okay, he said. Okay, son. And he stepped back. Because you can hold a door open, but you cannot make a man walk through it, and there is a point past, which holding it just makes you late. Holloway came halfway out of the office. We got a problem, Frank? You tell me, Delgado said. You're the one balancing benches. He let it sit 1 beat too long. Mind the cargo's mine. The counter's yours. We clear on whose name's on the rolls tonight? Crystal, Holloway said, and the word had an edge under it now. The edge of a man who has heard the floor creak under a thing he thought was solid. In the corner, the woman watched the loadmaster fight a battle she had not asked him to fight, on her behalf, against his own interest, simply because the math was wrong, and he was a man who could not abide wrong math. And she did the thing she had not done in 2 hours. The corner of her mouth moved, and this time, it stayed long enough to be called what it was. She almost smiled. If you are wondering who travels through a war zone with no badge, no name, no lanyard, and a priority flag that a master sergeant has to break a law to override, if a loadmaster with 22 years cannot place her, and that is the tell, then stay where you are. Subscribe, because the next 10 minutes answer every question this room has been too busy laughing to ask. Brandt picked up the microphone. Final call, he said, for the souls who actually get to fly. And he did not look at the corner at all. 20 years before the desert, there was a valley, and the valley was on fire. Helen Avery was 32 years old that night, a captain, the aircraft commander of an HH-60G Pavehawk with a tail number she could still recite in her sleep. A team was down in that valley, pinned in a dry riverbed, with the high ground against them, and the weather coming in over the ridge like a lid lowering onto a pot. The call had gone out the way those calls always went out, flat and fast and full of numbers, and 3 rescue birds had spun up to answer it. 2 of them turned back. They were not wrong to. The math said, turn back. The ceiling was below minimums and dropping. The valley was a funnel of tracer, and the people who calculate such things for a living calculated that night that the cost of going in exceeded the value of what could be brought out. 2 helicopters did the math and turned for home, and no board ever faulted them, because the math was real. Helen Avery did the math twice. Then she went anyway. She would not, in 20 years, describe it as courage. She described it, on the rare nights she described it at all, as arithmetic of a different kind, that there were 11 people in that riverbed who would be dead by dawn, and that she had a machine and a crew and 40 seconds of nerve, and that the only number that had ever mattered to her was the one that counted who came home. She flew the ridge on instruments with the windscreen full of nothing. She dropped into the valley through a seam in the weather that closed behind her like a door. The landing was 40 seconds. She would always remember it as 40 seconds because she counted them out loud on the intercom while rounds walked across the airframe, and her flight engineer called the holes, and her 2 para-rescue men worked the litter at the open ramp. 40 seconds on the ground, in a place built to kill anything that stopped moving. 11 souls came up that ramp, out of the dark, dragged and carried and shoved, and on the radio, a voice she did not know was saying a call sign she did not yet own, over and over. Angel 6. Angel 6. You're taking fire, Angel 6. And she answered to it, because there was no one else for the voice to mean. The last man up was the cost. Staff Sergeant Eli Marsh was her para-rescue man, 26, the kind of steady that does not look like anything until the night it is the only thing in the world holding. He went back down the ramp for the last man because the last man could not climb, and he put the last man on his back and turned for the aircraft, and he was 3 steps from the ramp when the valley took him. He got the last man aboard. He did not come aboard himself, not the way the living do. He was gone before the wheels were wet, before the seam in the weather, before the ridge. She flew the wounded bird home on one good engine and a prayer she did not believe in, with 11 living strangers and 1 dead friend in the back. And she did not weep until the rotors had stopped and the ramp was down and the count was done. Then she sat in the cockpit alone and made the only sound she would ever make about it, once, and put it away. They pinned the Distinguished Flying Cross to her chest in the spring, in a hangar, with a band, and a general read the citation in a voice built for citations. The theater, the year, the 11 souls, the valley, the fire. They gave her the Purple Heart for the medal that was still in her shoulder and would be for the rest of her life. The medal that made the inward-turned watch a habit, because for years the light off a crystal had meant a thing her body never unlearned. And they made official the call sign the unknown voice had given her over the radio that night, the one the records would carry for 20 years. Angel 6. She kept Marsh's name on a worn slip of paper in her flight glove, and when the gloves wore out, she moved the slip to the new ones, and she had done that for 20 years, through every cockpit and every command and every desk they ever sat her behind, as the metal on her chest grew heavier and the stars arrived. Now she was 52, and she sat on a hard bench in a desert terminal in plain gray clothes, and a boy with a clipboard had decided she was a joke called Standby Lady. And not one person in that building knew that the reason the 11 names on a 20-year-old roster had grandchildren was the still woman in the corner they had spent the night laughing at. She was not a passenger who had been bumped. She was the reason a generation of people on a forgotten roster had gone home. And she was the only person in the terminal who knew it, which was exactly how she had arranged the evening, because you cannot see how a place really runs from the front of the line. You can only see it from the corner, in gray, with a notebook, while the people who think no one is watching show you precisely who they are. The trap was nearly shut. She had not built it. She had only waited inside it and let it close itself, name by name, signature by signature, in the dark she had chosen to sit in. When boarding closed, Brant wanted the corner cleared. It was not enough that she had been bumped, keyed, and joked off his manifest. The standby lady was still there, in his terminal, in his eye line, sitting with her bag and her notebook, and that calm that would not crack. And the calm had begun to feel, to a man who needed reactions the way some men need air, like a kind of insolence. The flight was loading, the benches were emptying, and she would not leave because she had been told to wait, and so she waited, which to Brant looked like defiance dressed as obedience. He came around the counter. He had never come around the counter all night. The counter was the throne, and he ruled from behind it. But he came around it now, crossed to the corner, and stood over her, with the particular posture of a young man who has confused a uniform for a size. "You're done here," he said. "Boarding's closed. I need this area clear." And when she did not move fast enough for him, when she simply looked up at him with that flat, patient attention, he reached down and took her bag off the bench. He took it by the strap and swung it to the floor by the door, her sterile bag, the one with no tags, and he did it in front of a dozen witnesses, and he said, loud enough for the room, "Out. Now. Before I call the patrol and have you walked off my flight line. I'm not asking again, Missy." The terminal got quiet in the way a room gets quiet when something has gone a step too far and everyone feels it, but no one has the rank to name it. Delgado, halfway to the airplane, stopped. Pratt, at the counter, went rigid, his eyes on the glowing P-1 flag he had been told to ignore. The woman stood. She did not stand the way a wronged civilian stands, all heat and hurry. She rose without using her hands, weight balanced, spine squaring on the way up the way a thing squares that has stood in front of generals and gunfire and never once been the one to flinch. She was not tall. It did not matter. The room's center of gravity moved to her the moment she was on her feet, and a few people felt the floor of the night tilt without understanding why. She walked to the door. She picked up her own bag, calmly, settling the strap on her shoulder, and she turned back to face him. And she spoke, and her voice was very quiet and carried to every corner of the room. "Call them," she said. "Call all of them." And then she smiled. It was the first full smile of the night, and it was not warm, and it was not cruel. It was the smile of a person who has been waiting 2 hours for someone to make exactly the mistake that has now been made. Delgado saw it from across the room and went still himself, because in that smile, he finally found the bottom of the feeling that had ridden his neck all night. He still did not have her name, but he had her shape now, and the shape was not civilian, had never been civilian, and he understood with a cold clarity that the boy at the counter had just laid hands on something the boy could not begin to measure. Brandt, committed now, raised his hand to wave the security patrol over from their post by the door. He did not get to finish the gesture. The flight line door opened on a wash of hot night air, and boots came through it, and the light caught a silver eagle on a colonel's chest, and behind the eagle came the last thing that small kingdom had left to lose. The colonel came through the door, already talking, already mid-stride, the way a senior officer moves through a place he runs. And then he saw the woman by the door, and the rest of him caught up with his eyes, and he stopped. Colonel Marcus Webb was 47, and the acting commander of the Air Expeditionary Wing that owned every aircraft on that flight line, and he was, himself, manifested on tonight's lift, confirmed seat, his name on the roll, headed forward to the field on the same C-130 the standby lady had been bumped from. He had walked into his own passenger terminal expecting to find a counter, a clerk, and his seat. He had briefed the incoming commander's photograph for a week. He had studied the face of the general who was coming to take his wing, because that is what a careful officer does. And so the face by the door did not take him 1 second to place. He came to attention. Not the soft brace of a man being polite. The full thing, the involuntary thing, the body arriving at a truth before the mind has finished forming the sentence. "General Avery." His voice cracked across the terminal and shut every other sound off like a valve. "Colonel Webb, ma'am. I didn't know you were on tonight's lift." The word moved through the room like a pressure change. "General." People who had been laughing an hour ago turned toward the corner, toward the door, toward the plain woman in gray with the bag on her shoulder, and began, one by one, to understand the size of the thing they had been in the room with all night. Delgado snapped to attention so fast and so cleanly that 22 years made the motion for him. Pratt stood up behind the counter without deciding to. The contractors went silent. The chaplain woke up, and Tyler Brandt's face began to move. It went through the stations one at a time, and a person watching could have named each one. Confusion first. The simple inability to fit the word general onto the woman he had called Missy. Then disbelief, a small shake of the head, a reach for some version of the night in which this was not happening. Then recognition, the awful arrival, the manifest flag he had overridden, and the P-1 priority Pratt had named, and the loadmaster's warning, all landing at once in a single understanding. And then horror, plain and total, as the clipboard in his hand became the heaviest object in the building. "General," Brandt said. His voice had nothing in it. The manifest said P-1 confirmed, Airman." Webb's voice was iron. "It said Priority 1. Your own clerk read it to you. You turned the screen toward him, and you re-rolled her to standby anyway. And then you keyed a no-show that never happened, and then you put your hands on her bag." Each clause landed like a round seating in a chamber. In front of 40 witnesses and your wing commander's incoming relief. Webb turned to the general, and he did the thing that gave the night its title. He gestured back through the door toward the waiting aircraft, toward his own confirmed seat on it, and he offered it to her, outright without hedging, the senior man in the building giving up the one seat that was indisputably his. "Ma'am, my seat's yours. I'll catch the next rotator. It's the least this terminal owes you tonight." And the general, who had been bumped, joked at, keyed as a security concern, and ordered out the door, looked at the colonel's offered seat and did not take it. "No," she said. Quiet. Final. She nodded toward the bench where the bumped sergeant still sat, keyed as a no-show, going nowhere. "Give the seat back to the man he bumped. Give the other one back to the sergeant your clerk rolled off. They had priority and they had orders, and they earned the flag the honest way." She let that settle. "Then we'll talk about your terminal, Colonel, all of it. The benches somebody upstairs apparently doesn't count." Webb's jaw tightened, because he heard, under the order, the size of what she had been sitting in the corner watching. "Yes, ma'am." In the back, Master Sergeant Holloway had gone the color of the floor. He had heard the word, general, and he had heard the words, no-show, and benches, and we'll talk about your terminal, and 15 years of a soft conscience did the arithmetic in about 4 seconds. He began, very quietly, to move toward the back office and the door behind it. "Hold the Master Sergeant," Webb said, without turning his head, and the security patrol that Brandt had meant to summon against the general crossed the room instead and put themselves, politely and immovably, between Holloway and the exit. Brandt stood at the center of a terminal that had turned, every face in it, to look at him. He was holding a clipboard that suddenly weighed nothing, in a kingdom that had lasted exactly as long as it had taken one careful colonel to say one name. The night came apart fast, the way these things do once the first true thing is said out loud. Within the hour, the real manifests were pulled, not the narrated version, the source, and laid side by side with the rolls Brandt had keyed and Holloway had thumbed. The pattern Delgado had found in the dark came up into the light for everyone to read. Priority passengers bumped. No-shows that were not no-shows. Contractors in seats that belonged to soldiers with orders. And in the back office, in a drawer under a coffee maker, the thing that turned a bad night into an investigation, a small ledger in the master sergeant's own hand, a running account of seats traded forward for favors and folded envelopes, with dates, with names, with a tidy little column of what each bench had been worth. The Office of Special Investigations took the terminal apart by morning. Holloway was held. The ledger did to him what no general's anger ever could, because a man's own handwriting is the one witness he cannot intimidate. Brandt was pulled off the counter that same night and would spend the coming weeks learning, line by line, exactly which of his small cruelties had been administrative weather and which had been the front counter of someone else's crime. He had not known about the ledger. It did not save him. He had bumped P-1 passengers because a master sergeant told him the manifest was his to balance, and he had enjoyed it, and the enjoying was its own kind of sentence. The forward passengers flew. The sergeant with real orders took a real seat. The other bumped soldier took the seat Webb had tried to give the general. The C-130 that had sat an hour late on the ramp, built wrong and then built right by a woman in gray, taxied out at last with a full and rightful load, every soul on it a soul that belonged there. Before she left the terminal, the general found the boy who had been right. Devin Pratt was standing at the counter, where he had been told to stay in his lane, trying to look like a man who had not just watched the floor of his career open and close, and the general crossed to him and stopped, and looked at him the way she had looked at the manifest, carefully, completely, missing nothing. "You pulled the manifest twice," she said. It was not a question. "You read the P1 flag, and you said it out loud, and you got told to sit down." "Yes, ma'am," barely a whisper. "You were right at 2100, Airman." She held his eyes. "You were right, and you were outranked, and being right did not rescue you, and you said it anyway. That is the whole job, not the counter, not the screen. That," she let it land, "be right again tomorrow, and the day after, no matter who's holding the clipboard, especially when it doesn't rescue you. Are we clear?" Pratt's throat worked. "Clear, ma'am." "Good." And something in her face eased, just slightly, the way it had eased once before, that night, for the loadmaster who could not abide wrong math. "Then you'll do fine. The people who get written off rarely raise their voices. They do not need to. They keep the receipts, and they wait, and they let the small men finish writing the record that convicts them. If that lands somewhere true in you, if you have ever been the quiet one in the corner with the notebook, then subscribe to Honor Tales and stay close, because there is always another terminal, and there is always another quiet person sitting in the corner of it, and the corner is not the weak seat in the room. It is the one with the clearest view." Dawn came up gray, and then gold over the flight line. The general stood alone at the edge of the ramp and watched the C-130 she had been bumped from grow small against the lightening sky, its full load aboard, its manifest finally honest. The heat was already returning. Her bag sat squared at her boot. From her pocket she drew a worn slip of paper, soft as cloth from 20 years of folding, with a single name on it in faded ink, and she read it the way she read it every morning, and then she slid it back into her flight glove and closed the leather over it. A secure phone buzzed once against her hip. She answered it the way she answered everything, in as few words as the world would allow. "Avery." The voice on the line was distorted, careful, and it didn't use her rank. It used the only name that mattered for what it was about to say, and it said 3 things, and each of the 3 put a hand on the back of her neck. Angel 6, Kandahar corridors open again, and Reapers still breathing. She stood very still and watched the airplane disappear. Reaper. A call sign the records carried as lost, the way they had once carried hers. A name on a slip of paper she had not yet been allowed to fold away. A corridor she knew the shape of in the dark. She closed the glove over Marsh's name. "Copy," she said. "Inbound." She picked up her bag, settled the strap, and walked toward the next aircraft and the next mission with the unhurried economy of a person who had never in her life taken 2 steps where one would do. The general no one in that terminal had recognized, going forward into a dark country, alone, the way she had always gone. Behind her, the gold light caught the empty ramp, and the terminal she had cleaned out without raising her voice, and the corner where a quiet woman in gray had sat all night with a notebook, counting. Every soldier carries a story that few ever hear. Listen with your heart. Thank you for staying and watching. Subscribe to Honor Tales for more.